Hello, dear friends. We were warned long ago that the arrival of the new energy would destabilize the old system. It's not just something falling apart. Everything is collapsing at once. No one can say he didn't know. Opinion piece. Brutal week. Critical point. Energy crisis. Historic moment. Moment of truth. Unstable situation. Mounting pressure. World has changed. Stress in the oil market. Stock markets plummet. Markets falling in chain. Gold suffers its worst week. This hasn't been seen for decades. We are approaching the moment of truth. Let's start. It's no exaggeration to call this week brutal because it's the convergence of several very powerful shocks at the same time. A historic energy shock has coincided with sharp and synchronized declines in virtually all major financial markets under the threat of a larger war in Iran. This is the fourth consecutive week of significant drops in global stock markets, while oil and gas prices have soared. It's a perfect storm of geopolitics, energy, markets, and the financial system. The war in Iran has entered its third week, with attacks on energy infrastructure in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz virtually blocked, which has driven up the price of oil and gas. Brent crude rose by more than 50% in March, closing the week above $112, while natural gas has surged by 50% in just a few days. The trigger has been the war and the energy crisis, with attacks on energy infrastructure in the Gulf, the risk of disruption to oil and gas supplies, and the threat of military escalation. The result is that Brent crude has soared above $110, natural gas prices have skyrocketed, and there has been a massive release of strategic reserves. That alone is enough to destabilize the global economy. It's not just one thing falling. Everything is falling at once due to extreme volatility. Stock markets, tech companies, cryptocurrencies, bonds, and commodities. There is a talk of the most severe energy crisis of all time, potentially lasting for months. This would imply persistent inflation, lower economic growth, and pressure on consumers and businesses. Central banks are trapped. If they raise interest rates, they further depress the economy. If they don't, inflation skyrockets. This is a dangerous trap-like scenario. The price of gold falls. Bonds offer no protection, and there is high volatility across the board. When safe havens fail, the system enters an unstable zone. Gold, which in theory should act as a safe haven, suffers its week in over 40 years and falls back below $5,000. When traditional safe havens fail, the system enters an unstable zone with high volatility across the board. In addition to hidden financial risks, there are also risks to private credit. Warnings from banks like Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank's pronouncements about a historic moment. Wall Street and European stock markets have experienced several weeks of declines, with the Dow Jones and S&P 500 and Nasdaq closing another week in the red amid fears that energy inflation will halt the Fed's rate cuts. Daily drops of over 1 or 2% are being recorded in the main indices, and commodity volatility is at levels not seen in decades. In short, it is being described as a brutal week, not only because of the stock market crash, but also because of the exceptional combination of war in a key energy hub, an energy price crisis, failing safe havens, and a growing risk of systemic financial instability. Many media outlets are describing this situation as a critical point in the conflict. Middle East. Trump says the US is considering reducing its military activity in Iran. Trump declares victory over Iran after achieving nearly 100% of his objectives. I think we have won, says Trump, as Iran refuses to engage in dialogue in the Strait of Hormuz and the Houthis threaten the Red Sea Strait. US takes control of Iranian oil routes in the Strait of Hormuz. Global supply is restored and fuel prices will fall. US increases deployment of Marines in the Middle East. Trump considers sending troops to Iran. The US will send Marines and an ambitious assault ship into the Middle East. On Thursday, Trump ruled out deploying troops to Iran and asked Israel not to attack its energy infrastructure. Israel promises not to carry out any more attacks against Iranian energy assets. Jiang Xuanqing does not rule out possible ground incursion into Iran. Bahrain intercepted 132 missiles and 234 drones. US bases in the Middle East burn after Iranian attacks. Qatar is dethroned as the king of liquefied natural gas. Repairs to Qatar's natural gas plant will take 5 years. A fire broke out at a Kuwait refinery following a drone attack. Kuwait warns of a drone strike on one of its refineries amid renewed attacks on other Persian Gulf countries. Pakistan is outraged at being labeled an emerging missile threat. Sri Lanka rejects Pentagon's request to land fighter jets. Putin offers to reduce intelligence sharing with Iran if the US does the same with Ukraine. Economy. The energy crisis put central banks to the test. Stock markets plummet at the end of another brutal week. Wall Street plunges nearly 2% amid threat of an invasion of Iran. Stock markets are affected by geopolitics. Markets have plummeted. What matters now is how the situation will develop. Markets are in a very delicate situation. It's not panic but pressure. Crude oil rises slightly while stocks fall. Brent crude rises 3.54% and closes the week above $112 after 21 days of price wars. The US temporarily lifts sanctions on Iranian oil due to the energy crisis. The US authorizes the sale of Iranian oil on the high seas for 30 days in an attempt to control prices. Natural gas prices soar after Iranian attacks. Goldman Sachs warns of an unstable steady state. Traditional financial safe havens are failing. We are witnessing the biggest crisis in history. We are approaching a historic moment of truth according to Deutsche Bank. A ground war in Iran would increase energy market volatility. Commodity market volatility is at its highest level in decades. Bond markets are beginning to panic over inflation. Private credit threatens the financial system with an $840 billion hole. The coming crisis is growing in the shadows of the financial system and expanding rapidly. Attacks on Gulf energy companies threaten months of global gas supply. The International Energy Agency raises the release of its strategic reserves to 426 million barrels. The director of the AIE warns of the most serious energy crisis of all time and estimates it could last 6 months or more. Russia raises billions in 2 weeks of Iranian war. Precious metals. Gold suffers its worst week in 43 years. The price of gold is falling rapidly. Gold falls back below $5,000. Gold and silver speculators face a harsh reality. The cryptocurrency XRP has fallen 40% since January. Microsoft stock has plummeted this year. Richard Buxtehude states in the New York Times that we have returned to a period of crisis. Amazon is developing a new phone code-named Transformer. Is coffee a new cocoa? Some expect the price of coffee to plummet as well. The author of Rich Dad warns of a historic crash and predicts Bitcoin will reach $750,000. Russia benefits from the war while the impact on China is complicated. Demand for electric vehicles skyrockets due to the energy crisis. Europe. The energy crisis hits Europe. The EU opts for diplomacy in the Middle East and refuses to get involved in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump calls NATO countries cowards for not helping in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump calls NATO a paper tiger without the US. Trump shows more confidence in Putin than in European allies. The EU is open to helping unblock the Strait of Hormuz when conditions allow. 5 European countries and Japan are prepared to protect the Strait of Hormuz. The EU is open to helping unblock the Strait of Hormuz when conditions allow. It's a repetition. British bonds reach 18-year highs. The UK approves the use of British bases to target Iranian missile sites. A British teacher was suspended for saying immigrants should respect our laws or leave. France intercepts an oil tanker off Marseille suspected of belonging to Russia's ghost fleet. Germany and France give the European fighter jet one last chance. NATO redeploys its Iraq mission personnel to Europe due to the deteriorating situation in the Middle East. Hungary threatens new measures against Ukraine over Russian oil. Orbán announces he will block all EU measures on Ukraine until oil transit is restored. Europe wants to continue the conflict in Ukraine instead of seeking peace, according to the Kremlin. Norway's Crown Princess Mette-Marit appeared on national television in tears and uttered 3 words that changed everything. I was deceived, in quotes. Denmark planned to blow up Greenland's runways if the US invaded. Spain. The government reduces the VAT on fuel, electricity and gas to 10%. The government announces a fuel tax reduction of up to 30 cents per litre. Sanchez announces 80 measures that will mobilize €5 billion to mitigate the effects of the war. Rent freeze in Spain in response to the crisis. Spain announces a €5 billion anti-crisis plan due to the war in Iran. Teruel Airport becomes an aircraft parking lot due to the war. Spain sheds the burden of unemployment in the EU, but leads the world in jobs insecurity. The war in Iran will increase the average mortgage by €544 due to the rising interest rates. The IMF lowers its forecast for Spanish economic growth to 2.1% and warns about the housing crisis. The number of foreign residents in Spain has increased by 4.5%, reaching 7.5 million. Spain will have smart containers that will pay for your recycling your clothes. Renfe will purchase new high-speed trains before Easter. The European Public Prosecutor's Office is investigating possible fraud in the maintenance of the AVE high-speed rail line in the Adamuz section. The European Union's final report on the Spanish blackout points to a perfect storm of cascading failures. Spaniard create an AI that gives you a doctor's appointment without any waiting. AI awaits the birth of its little sister to become profitable. 20% of the world's quantum experts are Spanish. Americas. Mexico sends a new shipment of humanitarian aid to Cuba. A tanker carrying fuel to Cuba is diverted to Trinidad. The crisis in Cuba deepens amid blackouts and food shortages. Cuba refuses to negotiate a change of government. What Cuba is seeking is freedom, says an analyst. Coastal communities in Mexico fear oil contamination. Strong measures from Beijing to Mexico for restricting Chinese investment. Ecuador's hardline policy is not working, according to an expert. Colombia considers its crisis with Ecuador over. U.S. prosecutors are investigating Petro for alleged ties to drug trafficking. Milei's miracle is beginning to show its first cracks as unemployment rises in Argentina. El Salvador proposes life imprisonment for minors. Costa Rica extradites Celso Gamboa, former minister accused of drug trafficking, to the US. Argentina becomes a reliable oil supplier. Iranian threatens Argentina for its support of Israel. Milei's, that's a repetition, and it's due to a mistake of the translator, automatic translator. That's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.